Why does the College Football Playoff Committee obviously hate the Big 12? And when is that going to change? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. It is as jam-packed as it has ever gotten on this program today. First, we talk with Spencer McLaughlin about why Arizona State, Iowa State, and BYU, Colorado are being overlooked. In the middle segment, Colorado. TJ Pittenger of College Football Addiction. We talk about how Deion Sanders is back. And in the last segment, we talk with JT Wistrcell about how, guess who's also back? That's right, Cam Rising could quarterback Utah next year. Yeah. All of that and more on Locked On Big 12. If you hit subscribe, I get to keep my job. Without further ado, why are we being so disrespected by the College Football Playoff Committee?
BYU had a great season, 10-2. They will get absolutely positively zero consideration to be an at-large playoff team. Miami's in the same boat. Is that right? That's Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. You think it's wrong, Drake. Why?
Yeah, I think it's wrong because BYU to this point deserves a shot that isn't a hypothetical. Oh, well, BYU would lose to Alabama. They would lose to South Carolina. We know they would lose to Ole Miss and Miami, except we don't know that. Well, we keep playing these hypothetical games of what about these 9-3 SEC teams that should be ranked above BYU? Well, BYU's 10-2. What about this Miami team?
Michigan's going to lose to Ohio State. Vandy's going to lose to Bama. Kentucky's beating Ole Miss. Hypotheticals, man.
You've been listening to
right?
A lot of On 3 and ESPN, my friend. Very good. Picking up a national narrative that, to me, just isn't. If we do the blind test of college football playoff contenders, BYU has 2 ranked wins. One of those is a top 10 win. That's more than South Carolina. For BYU, win against Power Fours, they have 8. South Carolina has 6, and one of their 2 losses was against a ranked team in the Big 12 championship who is going to play for a spot in the college football playoff. Their other loss was our preseason Big 12 champion who didn't pan out. But what I think you see a lot of times in the SEC is that Kentucky loss or that Arkansas loss, whether it's Tennessee or Ole Miss, they're losing to teams that aren't on a win streak, that aren't hot. They're these sporadic, weird Oklahoma, Alabama. Oh, you lost. Whereas in the Big 12, a lot of these upsets were facing a Kansas team that rattled off 4 straight and looked dominant for a stretch of their season. Looked like the preseason Kansas we were promised. So I don't consider those to be as fluky as a lot of people would look from the, oh, you're 10-2 and lost to Kansas standpoint. I think BYU has a fighter's chance when you look at 9-3 ahead of them. BYU's 10-2, and those SEC teams played 8 conference games and then 4 random one-off games aside from that South Carolina Clemson game. I want to know why the SEC can keep getting away with that, and the Big 12 has to sit idle with the team that's got more wins than them.
I think this is an appropriate time to bring up the ridiculousness of the late season SEC ACC cupcake. I am in favor of a 9-game conference slate. I am not as aggrieved about it when your non-conference game or one of them is a protected rivalry against the ACC. So sure. Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, Florida, Florida State. Those sorts of games, if that's what your 9th conference game would be and it's that instead, I am okay with it. Yeah. But where I'm not okay, Drake, is to your point. What if BYU, do you realize that BYU, if they'd been able to schedule Mercer the second to last week, Wofford, Citadel, if they'd been able to do that in the second to last week of the regular season, they would be in the college football playoff right now, and no one, not a single person, would bat an eye or seriously object.
Can I tell you the
Yes, you can. I will permit it.
Learned this week is your non-conference games, don't play anybody. Don't. Go 4-0, 3-0 in non-conference, get to the end of the year, and let your record speak for itself. Why? Because I would rather beat Wofford than lose to a pretty solid LSU team or lose to a decent team that's in the top 15 like Miami. I would rather beat Wofford than have a loss in my record, and you're seeing that right now.
I see that. Allow me to present the other side of it. The reason we can have this discussion and why I do believe there is some validity to it, BYU, and yeah, you can say the SEC is better than the Big 12 if you would like, but BYU has played more Power 4 teams, and they didn't have a cupcake late in the conference. It's not just that there's one less conference game. It's that when everyone's beat up, when everyone's grinding, when Oregon's going to Wisconsin and grinding out, or Penn State's going to Minnesota and they're eking out wins because they're playing a conference opponent, these teams are playing schools that have zero chance of winning the football game. BYU, though.
Hey, ask Auburn in 2023.
Well, that was at least, an FBS team, not an FCS team. But hey, Hugh Freeze will be back for another year. So you never know. There's still time. But I think that for BYU, one of the reasons that I think this is a reasonable discussion to have, and not just, the Big 12 getting screwed, but actually look at the nuts and bolts of the Alabama versus BYU resume comparison, is Alabama's got a top 10 win, right? Against Georgia. What does BYU have? Oh, that's right. A top 10 win. So there's a risk reward calculation. Like imagine if you were, and clearly it hasn't been enough, but imagine if you were comparing 9-3 Alabama to 10-2 BYU. That's not what they're doing. They're just completely overlooking a BYU or even a Miami in this spot for that matter. Miami's got a better record against bowl eligible teams than Alabama does, but Alabama's got the Georgia win and Miami's got a win against Florida, which only counts as a great loss for Ole Miss, does not count as a good win for Miami, of course.
Yeah, and if you look at the BYU game against SMU, now we're talking about, what if Clemson gets a win against the regular season ACC champion? Didn't BYU already do that and on the road, not at a neutral site? That was one of the main questions that national analysts have asked this week as well. Clemson now has a win against the regular season champ. But then I raised my hand and say, well, we have that too. We already did that on the road. But what I've learned is anything that happened in September doesn't exist. Hey, it's a brand new football team now. They're playing different ball. There was that key injury. We do this every single year. That Notre Dame loss, forget about it. It's a mulligan. In a 12-team playoff, you get a mulligan. The only time you don't is when you lose late. Had BYU lost these two games in the first three of their season in the same format to Kansas and a top 15 team, they would be a top 10, top 15 squad, undoubted, right there in the mix.
I don't know about top 10, but I think top 15. I think they'd be more in the mix because I agree. If
they won 8 straight, I mean that you're just climbing from there. You're ascending, and
that's true. That's the South Carolina. That's the South Carolina discussion. It's like, oh my gosh, they're red hot. You got to put them in. Like, no, you can't, because these results happen. I'm sorry you don't like the outcome for this or that reason, but even if you put the LSU game aside and the bad call from the officials, you still had a chance to beat Bama. You didn't. You still could have beaten Ole Miss at home. You got walloped. Yep. Those things have to matter. But the reason that I'm rooting for Clemson this week, Drake, is if they win, this is all simplified. Because, I hope and pray, cannot guarantee, I hope and pray 11-2 SMU isn't bypassed for a 9-3 Alabama team that got whooped by Oklahoma.
Yep. And that point, if Clemson does win, I agree with you there. We can decide, all right, there's no other Big 12 team getting in. There's no way we have a 9-3 SEC team that we have to let in here over an SMU who sits with 2 losses. But what did the committee tell us, Spencer? If you lose in your conference championship game, we're not going to harm you for that. It doesn't. I'm
so glad you mentioned that, because what do you want to bet?
It's the biggest
that Arizona State has a 0, and I mean 0% chance of getting into the playoff if they lose to Iowa State this Saturday.
For sure. And to that point, at the end of the year, if you go, hey, Arizona State's the Big 12's regular season champion, they're going to the playoff. Like, okay. In any given year where the Big 12's got a team who's 5th and 9th, don't play the conference championship game. Just don't. There's no point in playing a conference title game at that point, because you're going to get left out if you're that 9th ranked team and you lose. I guarantee it. They're lying to you. This is a fun thing. It's a fun narrative to have until it goes against the Big 12 and they just, that's low-hanging fruit, and leave you out of the college football playoff with a two bid league. And we're only going to get one in. That's it. But if you blind resume it,
the Big 12 is going to get in. Think about this. The Big 12 is going to get in the same number of teams as the Group of 5.
Yes.
And you can throw that accusation, the Big 12 is a Group 5 conference. I am watching these college football games play out all across the country. There is no way, a couple of things. the gap between the SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC is as big as you thought it was. Georgia Tech is just one example of that. There are others, but that's one particular example. And to pretend that a team in the Group 5, if they have a great season, would have the same record if they were in the Big 12 or the ACC, absolutely, positively. I know we're not big on hypotheticals here, but I'm not buying that, Drake. I don't know who would put their money on it. Or here's another way to think about it. If you did what college basketball does, and you do conference challenges, and you were to say, all right, we're going to put R1 against your one and R2 against you, and you go all the way down, Big 12 against the Mountain West, top to bottom, 1 through however many teams are in the Mountain West, because probably not quite as many as the Big 12. Who is going to put their money on the Mountain West?
Hey, who's going to put their money on the Big 10? You get to Team 5 and you start going, oh, shoot. Things get real thin in that conference after you get after you get past the top half. Whereas in the Big 12, we've had like 8 teams ranked this year because at any point in time, these schools have gotten hot and played good football. Baylor is a great example of that, too, at 8-4 now under Dave Aranda, having won 6 straight. So,
Baylor, 8-4. How about that?
The Bears. They're keeping the coach. They're keeping
How about before you go, Jake?
Yeah.
A 5-second response. Rich Rodriguez to West Virginia. Does it make any sense?
Not when Nick Saban has already accepted the job. Thank you, Spencer. Always a pleasure.
Locked on Big 12. Serious, a solid 60% of the time, and we appreciate that.
Whatever. Pause it right there. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go. I don't think you understand. FanDuel is where I go to say, hey, look, I get it. 2.5 points, 2 points in favor of Arizona State. That's a good little bit right there. I think Iowa State's going to win, or I think Arizona State's going to win. That's when you go to FanDuel, you tell FanDuel, here's what I believe is going to happen in this game. And if it hits, if it's correct, FanDuel will give you money. And right now, new customers bet $5. And if your bet hits, you get 150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to bet live on the NFL and college football all in one place. Check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more, and do it with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's get into how Deion Sanders is staying in Colorado.
The most watched team in the Big 12 this year, Colorado, narrowly, by percentage points, misses out on a trip to Arlington in the Big 12 championship, but still exceeded a lot of expectations, still planning on playing a lot of guys in the bowl game. Like Coach Prime said, could very well get to a 10-win season at this point still, which would be one of the best in Colorado's recent history. You want to take just a quick 30 seconds to reflect on Colorado's 2024 season. And then I know Colorado fans are already wanting to talk about next year.
Absolutely awesome. I mean, this is a Colorado fan base. I don't mean to use other Big 12 teams to compare, but I will here. BYU fans are completely, I don't want to say disappointed, but a little underwhelmed. They're completely underwhelmed by not going to the Big 12 championship. However, the rhetoric out of Colorado, out of Deion Sanders, out of the fan base is, yes, Colorado football is back. The country is watching. Even though they missed out on millions of dollars and plenty of exposure from the Big 12 championship and a possible playoff spot, that doesn't matter right now because Colorado is back on the football map. And for BYU, they've been up and down in college football the last 15 years. Colorado has not. They've only been down. They've had 2 winning seasons the last 16 years, TJ. And so for them to be here at 9-3 with a Heisman Trophy winner on their roster, that is more than huge for Boulder and that program. I think Colorado fans are wearing the brand proudly today, even though they're not in the Big 12 championship.
Now, again, they exceeded so many expectations, and again, we're razor thin close to being there if they pull out a win in either of their Big 12 games.
Yeah.
And Colorado's, today is signing day that we're recording this on. Obviously, Julian Lewis at this point has signed. They've flipped some other guys. They've signed some other guys that I'm sure Coach Prime has a surprise or two up his sleeve. We're recording this kind of early in the day, so don't yell at us if we didn't mention your favorite recruit on here. But What's the future look like under Coach Prime without the big question, Shedeur and Travis?
Yeah, I think at this point, Deion Sanders is staying in Boulder, Colorado. If I had to call it today at the time of recording, which could change in the span of 24 hours and is bold, but I really do think that the rhetoric that came out of some smaller journalists in the middle of the season of, hey, I've worked around Deion, he cares about these young men and wants to see them succeed. I don't believe he's an NFL coach. I do think he's going to stay at the college level and keep these guys accountable, build a program of good young men. I'm starting to really buy into that. If I had to predict it today, especially based on things that Deion has said at the podium, I do believe he's going to stick around for a little bit. Now, why? I think that could be the only answer. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the exposure. He's Coach Prime, but he's impacting lives. And he talks about that a whole lot when he goes in front of a microphone. So if you are Deion Sanders looking at the future, it's very bright because now not only are you getting blue chip guys out of the transfer portal, you're getting blue chip guys out of the high school ranks as well. It's not hard when Deion or Warren Sapp sits down in your living room and says, hey, that last bozo, that Eli Drinkowitz guy, that nerd, yeah, you can play for him or you can play for me. Look at this chain. Like, I mean, I know who I'm playing for in that conversation. And Eli Drinkowitz is an elite recruiter. But when Deion Sanders is in your living room, that changes the game. As long as Deion's at Colorado, they should be in the top 3, top 5 in a chaotic Big 12. And especially if he's back next year, even without a Travis Hunter or Shedeur Sanders or Shiloh Sanders, Colorado is a threat to win the Big 12 championship, go to the college football playoff, and should be a top 25 team in the preseason because they're the only school boasting multiple 5-star kids.
Yeah, you mentioned so many things there that I'll follow up on.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does, man. And Coach Prime created the ego. Like, we get it, right? Like, we get that Coach Prime very much likes it. But all those things aside, he does somewhat, and they're very different personalities, but he does somewhat remind me of, that ball signed by him, Bobby Bowden, where it was very important to him to not only win football games and be the greatest, but also to make an impact on kids' lives. And if all he cared about was Travis and Shedeur and Shiloh, whatever, like if all he cared was his kids, he'd already be gone, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest with ourselves here, right? Okay, let's start working on the draft, guys. Y'all ain't playing the bowl. We're going to the NFL. I'm going with you, And so I agree with that. I do think that there's this rap about like, oh, he's in it for himself or he's just in it for his kids. And man, I just don't think that's the case, especially when you look at, okay, he spent a lot of time working on this recruiting class to just up and leave it, just up and go. And, you think about next year and, man, nobody talked about this. Well, no, people talked about it. They just didn't talk about it enough. Robert Livingston, was that the hire of the offseason in bringing him in? And it was a question, right? Like, he's just a safeties coach or a DB's coach in the NFL. Like, is that really going to work out? That was the hire of the offseason. Like, Colorado's defense going from what it was last year to what it was this year, phenomenal. And so, yeah, you're going to lose Travis Hunter off that. You're going to lose some other guys, too, on the defensive line and Shiloh. But, like, that's what's going to make their defense good for a while, as long as he's there.
Yeah, I love the fact that Colorado has found this formula of, hey, we're going to hire a former NFL legend, and he's going to build a coaching staff of NFL legends, NFL coaches, elite college coaches, and create a culture where every one of those people feels the pressure of winning for sure, but also feels valued by the head coach, Deion Sanders, and a guy that you want to feel valued by. Now, look, TJ, there were those war stories of, this second string cornerback comes out in Deion's first year and says, yeah, he lined us up, 25 of us down the hallway and said, you're cut, you're cut, you're cut. If that did happen, you're seeing the benefits of that at Colorado right now. It doesn't mean Deion Sanders is a bad guy. He is a businessman. And in today's world of college football, you need somebody who's got some moxie. You need somebody who can handle the business side of college football, the people side of college football. And Deion is certainly there, especially with these hires he's made of pro-level coaches and coordinators. And I go back to that line of you're cut, you're cut, you're cut. What he was doing was ultimately benefiting the Colorado football program that needed complete overhaul. And it couldn't be, I'm going to sit down and have a long, heartfelt conversation with every one of you. It needed to be, I'm bringing my bags, they're Louis. And while we all made fun of that, he went 9-3 and had the Heisman Trophy winner on his roster this season.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize that maybe are casuals, I'll just say it, right? Whatever. I'm not here to make people feel good. I think people don't realize that every coach does that. They usually just make it a very long, drawn out process of, like you just said, sit down and talk and listen, buddy, we really would love to have a spot for you, but man, we can help you find something new. Where Deion just said, like, hey man, we're going to cut to the chase, right?
Look, TJ.
Yeah, like I've heard the end of the story.
So many stories of I didn't even talk to the head coach. It was the D coordinator. It was my position coach who brought me in and said we don't have.
Common.
It's relegated to the assistants. The fact that Deion was even in there, and I heard people like, I was wearing a sunglasses. Of course he was wearing his sunglasses. What he does. This wasn't a disrespect thing. We've got to get over the initial narratives about Deion being, he does things differently. It doesn't mean it's disrespectful. I've said it before that he's gone too far in this category, that category, but truly he's just being Deion State. He's tried to tell us the whole time, this is just who he is. So he's not having the DC have those conversations. He's looking you through the sunglasses in the eyes and saying, all right, we're moving on. And I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah. The fever pitch at the start of last year, the start of 23, died off some, obviously, with losing, and then reached pretty high heights again this year. And then obviously it's going to be pretty entertaining to watch what he is able to do next year, because it will look pretty different. Some things will look the same. What does this position look like? What does that position look like? But like you said, it would surprise me if they're not talked about early as a contender for the Big 12, which again, it starts to turn, right? First year, oh, it's cute. Second year, they're not going to do much. And then third year, man, there's some expectations that go with this. Now we're kind of expecting you to stick around and to be around. And we expect your games in November to mean something again in 2025. And a guy who has never shied away from the prime time, let's be a little punny there, but I am interested to see how things are handled there.
Yeah, man, TJ, this could be, can't imagine how your title's going to look here. From Deion Sanders returns to wins a Big 12 title next year, maybe the biggest prediction that I have for Deion and company, he will land an elite quarterback in this offseason from the transfer portal. He will absolutely do that and build pieces around that kid that we will talk about all offseason long. If Deion stays, and I do believe, I believe confidently he will, there's a big-time quarterback coming to Boulder soon.
Drake got big news. Cam Rising could still be coming back to Utah football. I'm sure some people listening being like, what are you talking about? Well, Kyle Whittingham did just say at his press conference last week that they were still waiting on a decision from Cam on what he's going to do. Now, they said it'd come a week to 10 days. We're actually approaching that deadline rather quickly. So it sounds like Utah's open to the idea of Cam coming back. Cam seems open to the idea of coming back. Really quick, I'm going to turn over to you in a moment. Utah should not want Cam back. Cam should not want to come back, in my opinion. But it's at least something that's being discussed, as crazy as it is.
No, please, no, don't. And it's not from the standpoint of, wow, I really do think Cam Rising would cook the Big 12. But there's a point, the shelf life of a quarterback in the NFL, we talk about a lot. How about the shelf life of a college quarterback? We don't talk about very much. This reminds me of a Charlie Brewer. So you saw Charlie Brewer go to Baylor and take Baylor to an 11-1 Sugar Bowl season where the Bears competed in the Big 12 championship game. And he was nails. He was great. And then at some point, he got old. Injuries caught up to him. He lost his fastball. When we talk about guys who have lost their fastball, Cam Rising has to be in that category, because we cannot keep talking hypothetically about a guy, JT, you mentioned, was starting football games while Tom Brady was doing the same. A guy who hadn't played a game since Tom Brady was quarterback when he came out and was doing it this year for Utah for the couple of games that he got. There's no more. Like, well, yeah, we saw it a long time ago that he can play quarterback. Is that enough for you to? Here's the problem, JT. Here's the dang problem if you're Utah. This is what fires me up so much is I would have made the case that Utah wouldn't have been a Big 12 championship contender even if Cam Rising was healthy the entire season. You know who pushed back on that? Locked On College Football, Spencer McLaughlin. What he said to me was Dylan Gabriel. Dylan Gabriel goes to Oklahoma and beats Texas. Goes to Oregon, Oklahoma gets blown out. On both ends of that, before he was there and right after he was there, Gabriel was a big difference. Maybe Cam Rising was too. But the problem was Utah sold out for Cam Rising. Where did that get the OC, I should say? Fired. Andy Ludwig got fired. You know why? There wasn't a contingency plan. Isaac Wilson was never ready. He wasn't. Could he be a good college quarterback in 2 years? Yes. Could he be an elite college quarterback in 2 years? Yes. But he was thrown into a fire that was completely unnecessary. And at no point did he consistently look confident. And you cannot do that to one of your biggest recruits, one of the biggest recruiting wins you could get in the state of Utah because of the BYU part of this. And you put the kid in such a tough spot that now, if I'm a transfer portal quarterback, I look at Utah and go, well, who's their offensive coordinator? And, they rotated quarterbacks.
Have one right now still.
Don't
That's
have one.
another problem.
You rotated quarterbacks like I change underwear. Like people are just going one after the other after the guy. And if I'm a transfer quarterback, I see that, man. I know that when I go on my visit. And to me, keeping Cam Rising, you're risking once again getting into the middle of next season, game 3 of next season. He goes down and saying, oh, shoot, we don't have a backup plan. Instead, you take the car, you take the money, you take everything you got, and you pour, which Utah has resources, you pour it into a trusted transfer from Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, Florida. I don't care if it's Florida Atlantic. Somebody who has proven themselves in college football and has proven they can stay healthy. Not Cam Rising, who turns 26 in May. He will be 26 and a half when college football season starts. J.D. Pickell on 3 says it. He played a 5th year. Be in college, stay in college as long as you can. At some point, we have to stop wishing. Not from Cam Rising's standpoint. I'm sure he'd love to stay in college for the rest of his life. I would have too. From a standpoint for the University of Utah, for the coaching staff, move on. Let the kid go. Because if you want to win football games and be serious again in football, it starts with changing the guard, having a new era behind center, and it can't be Cam Rising.
2 things. One, real quick, it was reported that Andy Ludwig resigned, but yes, the whole obviously situation there was fishy. Real quick, Drake, what is the best ability in football?
I would say the ability to win. What are you looking for here?
It's good. Availability. I was looking for
availability. That's good. Yeah.
Good. Well, look, if you're looking at it like this, Cam has missed 22 of Utah's last 25 games. Like,
oh God.
What are you doing from that? But you can't rely on him. And here's the other fact, which is something you heavily hinted at. Let's say Utah brings Cam back, but then they're like, okay, well, we know we can't always bank on Cam's health, but it'd be awesome if he was healthy. Can we get a veteran quarterback? No veteran quarterback's going to come, because on the chance that Cam is healthy, they're going to feel like they're not going to play. And even if it was like, okay, I can beat Cam out, then the slightest struggles from that veteran you bring in, everyone will be like, let's let Cam back. Let's let Cam play, because this fan base flips very quickly. Drake, one thing I will say that is nice for Utah, and I'm curious how you'll feel about this. Look, Kyle Whittingham, I still think there's a really good chance he retires. It's still one of those 50-50 things. If Kyle Whittingham does retire, don't you think that at least helps Utah when Morgan Scalley is going and recruiting these guys, and you get the new offensive coordinator in there? There's enough newness, right? Morgan Scalley wants to do things a little differently. The new offensive coordinator is going to want to do things a little differently. That you can sell a quarterback on, hey, we're not doing this wishy-washy QB room crap. We're going to be one guy moving forward behind him. I got to believe that'll help Utah if they get the right OC and if it is Scalley at the helm for that.
Yeah, man, it's tough. This is a situation where there's so much volatility around the Utah program right now. From, Scalley is the guy at some point. It could be in 3 days. It could be in 2 years. We do not know. And Kyle Whittingham plays his cards pretty close to his chest. He can be a tough guy to predict, man. And that's not always a good thing. Sometimes as a Utah fan or somebody who covers Utah, yourself included, you'd be like, oh, wow, I'm expecting X out of Kyle Whittingham. You get the complete opposite. You're like, oh, shoot, what was that? And for better or worse, Mike Gundy is the same way. We see a lot of head coaches in college football who do things differently. And at some point, from the volatility's got to go away. We need an offensive coordinator. We need to know the future of our head coach. Is the head coach the defensive coordinator who's being appointed? We don't know the answers to those questions. So how do we start talking about the 26-year-old who's playing quarterback, who's throwing to kids who are 19, it's shocking to me that we could be talking about truly a 19-year-old Isaac Wilson in a quarterback room during the offseason watching first-team reps from the 26-year-old Cam Rising. That is a 7-year gap. That is an 18-year-old and an 11-year-old playing college football together. And optics aside, because it's not even an optics game of like, well, who cares? Throw it out the window if Cam helps Utah compete. I just don't think you can trust him to do that. And at this point, to your point of what I would sum it up as volatility, Utah needs something they can bank on, and it's not Cam Rising.
They do. And I think the tough thing, if you bring Cam back, you are alienating a ton of the fan base. They're going to be incredibly frustrated about the direction. And if you do move on to Morgan Scalley and bring Cam back and he gets hurt again, what a bad way to start things off. NIL, how does that affect NIL? If I'm someone who made the investment in Cam Rising, do I want to once again make that investment? Do I want to make that investment in another player? I might just be turned off by Utah at that point too. So there's a lot. I really think the risk way outweighs the reward, especially, look, sometimes the veteran quarterbacks work great. When they have the injuries that Cam Rising does at this point, they usually don't. So it's a really tough spot that Utah's in, but I do think find your offensive coordinator and move forward with a different quarterback. We appreciate everything that Cam did, but sometimes it's just time.
That's a great point. Is if Cam Rising had gotten hurt and they said, look, it's career ending, he's going to hang it up. This is a valiant, 27 gun salute or whatever it is. He goes off into the sunset. We talk about him as a legendary Utah quarterback and a big what if. We're getting into the range of like a Charlie Brewer, who was a Baylor legend, and then you're like, oh shoot, he just fizzled out. He overdid it. He overdid it. And while I know we can all be, oh yeah, heroic, like if we all think the right things, I mean, he's still a legend in our book, but everyone's going to be actually thinking, just shoot, man, what a grift. It was a grift. So I think it's time you just salute, say goodbye to Utah, send graphic, tweet graphic, and then remain somewhat of the legend status that Cam Rising still has.
Agreed. And hey, Charlie Brewer, Utah legend too, right? To further your point with everything that happened when he came out to Salt Lake.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah. Big oops. Big oops there for Utah. Drake, you're the man. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.